Okay. Heavenly Father, we give you glory and we thank you for another holy day, well, another Bible study. We thank you for allowing us to make it to this day. We glorify your name. We look to you, our strength, our redeemer, our purpose, our love, our sanity, our salvation. Glory be to your name. Let the Bible study go forth and let it be a sweet Savior unto your nostrils. Let it minister and let it bring counsel to those who are in need of it. Amen.
Hebrews 6 from the top. Therefore, laying what? Therefore, leaving the principles of the doctrine of Christ, let us go on to perfection, not laying again the foundation of repentance for dead work and of faith toward the Most High, two of the doctrine of baptism, and of laying on of hands, and of the resurrection of the dead, and of eternal judgment. Baptism, resurrection of the dead, judgment, laying on the hands, that's the doctrine. Resurrection of the dead, judgment, laying on the hands. When need to be alive, Jesus said, he is in the mountain. When it got kept down, it says in the 18 brothers was after the softest peace and passed the armies that fled into Africa. Now he be far the dead, going up and down, he never existed. In the heavenly realm at the right hand of the Father, where he's sitting, waiting on that word, waiting on that word. Soon as the Bible give him that word, he heard for the 10% of that third, and many will be destroyed.
All right, we're going to get into the book of Nehemiah. Before we get into the book of Nehemiah, let's do a recap. Yeshua bring forth judgment to those who continually disobey him. Throughout these lessons, we have shown that Yeshua brings forth judgment to those that disobey. He brought in the Assyrians, and later on he brought the Babylonians to put chastisement to Israel and to put chastisement to Jerusalem. This all started 722 BC. And that's when the Assyrians went forth and deported the 10 tribes out of Israel. Several centuries later, Yeshua used the Babylonians, to destroy, depopulate Judah, because Judah persisted in idolatry. Yeshua then chastises people for 70 years in Babylon. While we were in captivity in Babylon, the leadership changed from the Babylonians to the Persians. Daniel received his prophetic message in Daniel the 6th chapter, Daniel 9, Daniel 12. Then the book of Ezra came to start it with the decree of Cyrus and the decree that Yeshua's people would return to Jerusalem to rebuild Yeshua's house and to establish the feast and sacrifices once again. So Zerubbabel and Joshua went through on the first return. The first return is listed in Ezra chapters 1 through 6. And they were supposed to rebuild the temple. Then we get Esther. And Esther gives us a look into life in Persia. Ezra chapters 7 through 10 is the second return, which was led by Ezra himself in 458 BC. Now we're at Nehemiah. And Nehemiah brings the third return. And this was to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. That was about 445 BC. At this time in our history, Persia dominated the entire known eastern part of the world. Judah was mindful of disruptions or any sign of rebellion. Now, understand that rebuilding the walls was a threat to Persia. No one was allowed to build walls around their cities because they were captive by the Persians. That was not allowed. So the building of the wall is very, very important. The Persians did not allow other countries or other city-states that they occupied to build a wall around the cities, because a wall is a sign of defense, and they didn't allow it. Somehow, some way, it was allowed with the Israelites. Now, during the reign of Nehemiah, it is the Persian king Artaxerxes. And if you remember when we spoke in the book of Esther, Artaxerxes is Esther's stepson. Artaxerxes reigned from 464 to 423. And the reign of Artaxerxes gave advantages to Nehemiah. Nehemiah had a very significant role in the palace as a cupbearer. That's what Nehemiah's job was. He was a cupbearer. And Yeshua would use Nehemiah to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. In spite of Persia control over Jerusalem, Yeshua would still use Nehemiah to build up the walls. Notes of interest: first, Esther, like I said earlier, was Artaxerxes' stepmother. And Esther would have easily put influence on Artaxerxes. That's why Nehemiah was shown favor with Artaxerxes, because of Esther. The second thing is Daniel's 70 weeks. And the rebuilding starts the 70 weeks that Daniel talked about in the book of Daniel. The rebuilding of the walls, the rebuilding of the city. The third thing is called the Elephantine Papyri, which are Egyptian documents. And these documents are very important because they go along with the book of Nehemiah. These document shows Sanballat, the governor of Samaria, which is in Nehemiah 2:19, Johanan, which he's in Nehemiah 6:18, Nehemiah being replaced as governor of Jerusalem, which is in Nehemiah 10 and 16. All of those accounts are in the Egyptian documents, the Elephantine Papyri. And then finally, Nehemiah and Malachi represent the last of the Old Testament. Yes. Elephantine So earlier I said Nehemiah was a cupbearer. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1, and it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 12th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. So, as with the books of Ezra and Esther, named after his contemporaries, the book recounts his leadership. Now, a lot of the older Bibles will call Nehemiah the second book of Ezra, or Ezra the second. And they put Nehemiah and Ezra together as one book. The book of Ezra would be Ezra 1. The book of Nehemiah would be Ezra 2. Nehemiah did not write the book of Nehemiah. Ezra wrote the book of Nehemiah, but Ezra was a scribe. Nehemiah dictated to Ezra what to write. Much of the book was from Nehemiah's personal diaries. So a lot of the book of Nehemiah is from his own diaries, which Ezra wrote. Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1 says, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hachaliah, and it came to pass in the month Kislev, in the 12th year, as I was in Shushan the palace. Nehemiah 7 and 5 says, and my God put into mine heart to gather together the nobles and the rulers and the people, that they might be reckoned by genealogy. And I found a register of the genealogy of them that came up at the first, and found written thereof. So again, Nehemiah is using the book of Nehemiah is from Nehemiah's own diaries, combined with Ezra, Nehemiah dictating to Ezra. The events of Nehemiah 1 starts in 446 BC. It's the 20th year of Artaxerxes' reign. The book follows Nehemiah from his first term at governor, which is Nehemiah chapters 1 and 2, and his second term, which was Nehemiah, the 13th chapter. Now, during his second reign as governor is when the book of Nehemiah was written, and it was written by Ezra. So the only thing that we know about Nehemiah is his father's name, which we read in Ezra 1 and 1, and he had a brother, Hanai, which is in at Nehemiah 1 and 2. So we're going to read Nehemiah 1 and 2. Nothing else is known about Nehemiah's childhood, his youth, or his family. We do know that he was born during the Persian captivity. Nehemiah 1 and 2, that Hanai, one of my brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Israelites that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. So Nehemiah's great-grandparents more than likely were taken into captivity when Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians. He was born sometime after Zerubbabel went to Jerusalem. So he was a fairly young man at this point. Fairly young. Nehemiah's book has vivid imagery in it from his personal diary. A lot of the book, as we have seen in a few scriptures already, a lot of the book was on a first-person account. Now, before Nehemiah was born, the first group of Israelites left Persia, and that was about 538 BC. The second group, led by Ezra, was about 458 BC. Nehemiah left about 440 BC, around 440 BC. The name Nehemiah means God has comforted. We don't know the path that led for Nehemiah because there's not too much information. He doesn't give too much information as far as his upbringing. But we know that he had a high position as a cupbearer, which was a high position, a very high position. So we know he had a position as a cupbearer. And that position gave him influence with Artaxerxes when it was time for Yeshua to return his people for the third time to rebuild the wall surrounding Jerusalem. Nehemiah 1 and 3 says, and they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. So he becomes governor in Judea, and with the authority of the king and with resources from the king, he builds the walls. He looks at the walls at night and he did that so that when people who are going to oppose the work that was being done, which happened, he did it at night. He got laborers and divided the walls into sections, and he supervised the building of the walls. And this was done in 52 days. Remarkable. Now, during this time, Nehemiah faced some obstacles. So we're going to read Nehemiah, the second chapter. He faced some obstacles. The first one he faced was mockery. So we're going to read Nehemiah 2:19, and then we're going to read Nehemiah, the fourth chapter, verses 1 through 3. So during the time, the 52 days that he was to rebuild the wall, he faced mockery. Nehemiah 2:19, but when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem, the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this thing that ye do? Will ye rebel against the king? So, like I said earlier, that when in Persia, in the lands that Persia conquered, the cities were not allowed to build walls. So these men came up against Nehemiah, mocked him, laughed him, and then said, are you going to rebel against Artaxerxes? When in fact, Artaxerxes was the one who gave the blessing for them to do so. Going to Nehemiah chapter 4, starting at verse 1, but it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth and took great indignation and mocked the Israelites. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, what do these feeble Israelites? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. So he's saying that a little fox is going to knock down those walls because we are not smart enough to build walls. So this is what Nehemiah faced. Trying to do Yeshaya's work, and there's always opposition. Trying to do Yeshaya's work, and there's always foolish things that are being said while he's trying to do the work. Nehemiah also dealt with raids. We're going to stay in chapter 4, and we're starting at verse 7. Armed raids. Nehemiah 4 and 7. But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the breaches began to be stopped, then they were very wroth. Now they were wroth because they were not allowed to do and build walls around their cities. And conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall. So again, when people start saying, you're not going to be able to do it, talking negative, then certain people will start to speak that negative talk. Verse 11, and our adversary said, they shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them and slay them and cause the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Israelites which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, from all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. So he's dealing with people who are opposing them, people who are mocking them. Now people are banding together, armed raids, and they are coming against the Israelites. This is jealousy. because Artaxerxes allowed the Israelites to build a wall, but they were not allowed to build a wall or garrisons. And so that's why they are so angry and ready to fight the Israelites. There was a plot to murder Nehemiah. We're going to go to Nehemiah, the 6th chapter.
Actually, I just see something else.
Yes.
I was at his highest.
There was a plot to murder Nehemiah. Get him outside the city and kill him. Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 1. Now it came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arabian and the rest of our enemies heard that I had builded the wall, and that there was no breach left therein, though at that time I had not set up the doors upon the gates. Then that Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, Come, let us meet together in some one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But they thought to do me mischief. And I sent messengers unto them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease whilst I leave it and come down to you? Yet they sent unto me 4 times after this sort, and I answered them after the same manner. So they were very persistent in trying to get him outside of the city so they can kill him. Then, if you think that wasn't enough, blackmail. They tried to blackmail him. We're going to continue in Nehemiah chapter 6. We're going to start at verse 5. Then sent Sanballat his servant unto me in like manner the 5th time with an open letter in his hand, wherein was written, It is reported among the heathen, and Geshmu saith it, that thou and the Israelites think to rebel, for which cause thou buildest the wall, that thou mayest be their king according to these words. Now, they're saying that, of course, they're still jealous of the wall, but now what they're saying is that Nehemiah, you think of yourself as a king because you're going against Artaxerxes to build the wall. Verse 7 says, And thou hast also appointed prophets to preach of thee at Jerusalem, saying, There is a king in Judah, and now shall it be reported to the king according to these words? Come now, therefore let us take counsel together. So they don't understand that the king is Yeshua, that there will be no more king. There was no more kings of Judea at this point from Judah. There's going to be kings later on, but not from Judah. So they don't understand that this king that they're speaking of and the king that we were speaking of at this time was Yeshua himself. But they think, because they're carnal, that this is an earthly king that's going to rule Jerusalem. And that this earthly king is in defiance with Artaxerxes. Because the Persians would never allow anyone to build a wall around their city. We don't have walls around our city. So, Nehemiah, how can you do this? Verse 8. Then I sent unto him, saying, There are no such things done as thou sayest, but thou feignest them out of thine own heart. You're making up stuff. Verse 9, For they all made us afraid, saying, Their hands shall be weakened from the work, that it be not done. Now, therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. So they're coming against Nehemiah. They're telling me, Nehemiah, this is not going to happen. They just throwing all kinds of things out. The work is going to stop. You guys got a king in there defying Artaxerxes. We're going to kill you. Let's draw you out, making a mockery and a fool. And then, if that wasn't enough, here comes a lying prophet. We're going to read verses 10 through 12. Nehemiah chapter 6, verses 10 through 12. And it says, afterward I came unto the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Methabel, who was shut up. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us shut the doors of the temple, for they will come to slay thee. Yea, in the night will they come to slay thee. And I said, should such a man as I flee? And who is there that, being as I am, would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. And lo, I perceived that God had not sent him, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me. For Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He found out that this prophet, so-called prophet, came to try to intimidate him. So Nehemiah had all this stuff going on. He had false prophets. He had groups with weapons. He had people coming against him, trying to murder him. He had blackmail plots against him for doing Yeshaya's work. What the man prophesied was against the Bible, was against what Nehemiah was told what he was to do. And if Nehemiah was to leave, that of course would stop the people from working, stop the people from doing what they're supposed to do with the wall.
What about when the man told him to go into the temple?
Right.
And shut the doors. What do you think he was doing then?
No, that was just part of his lying prophecy.
To try to make it seem like it was real. Go in the temple,
Yeah, because if he would have, first of all, Nehemiah said that I will not go into the temple. I will not do that. Why would I go in the temple to save my life? Why would I have to go in the temple to save my life? Why would that be? He's saying, why should I flee? Who is there that I should flee? I'm doing what I am told. So Nehemiah is basically saying, if I'm doing what I'm told, then who's going to kill me?
Right.
Then, of course, Nehemiah said, you are a false prophet. You are a liar. He didn't believe the man. So in Nehemiah 6, verses 15 to 19, the wall was completed. Yeshua was glorified. The people were united because of the wall. Nehemiah was justified because the wall was finished. And Israel's enemies were terrified because Jerusalem was going to be restored. The work only took 52 days to complete, and Nehemiah gave praise to Yeshua. Nehemiah had to have courage, wisdom, but above all, determination. Because there were a lot of things that were against him. So see, Satan doesn't change his MO. When you are doing the work for Yeshua, there are a lot of things that come against you. Nehemiah gives us proof that if we stand firm in Yeshua, that nothing would be able to overtake us. Nehemiah goes to Jerusalem. We read that in Nehemiah 1:1. And he goes again in the 32nd year, which is in Nehemiah 13:6. Nehemiah, then, after the wall was built, there was a spiritual revival that happened. Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 1. A spiritual revival that happened. Nehemiah 8:1. And all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street that was before the water gate, and they spake unto Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded to Israel. Ezra starts reading the book and then starts examining and explaining the meaning to the people. In Nehemiah 8:8, it says, so they read in the book of the law, and God distinctively and gave the sense and caused them to understand the reading. So they're breaking down and reading Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers. They're reading the law. The very next day, Ezra meet with some of the priests and some of the Levites to give them insight. And they celebrated, and it was the Feast of Tabernacles. First Feast of Tabernacles celebrated, and God knows how long. Nehemiah 8:13-14. And on the second day were gathered together the chief of the fathers of all the people, the priests, and the Levites unto Ezra the scribe, even to understand the words of the law. And they found written in the law, which the Lord had commanded by Moses, that the children of Israel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month. That is Tabernacles. The sacrificial system started, and they pay close attention to what the Bible says. So we're going to go Nehemiah chapter 10, and we're going to read verses 34-36. And it says, and we cast the lots among the priests, the Levites, and the people for the wood offering to bring it into the house of our God, after the houses of the fathers at times appointed year by year, to burn upon the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the law, to bring the first fruits of our ground and the first fruits of all fruit of all trees year by year unto the house of the Lord. Also, the firstborn of our sons and of our cattle, as it is written in the law, and the firstlings of our herds and of our flocks, to bring it to the house of our God unto the priests that minister in the house of our God. So they started to obey all of the holy days. They also took an oath. Nehemiah chapter 10, going up to verse 29. It says, They clave to their brethren, their nobles, and entered into a curse and into an oath to walk in God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord our God and his judgments and his statutes.
No religion.
No religion.
No Catholicism, no Christianity, no nothing. It says his laws.
Right. When the marriage reforms were carried out, they read aloud the book again. Nehemiah 13:1. On that day, they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever.
Did we determine why was that before?
Because those were Lot's children, but they came against us in the wilderness. All right, so the second major theme of the book is obedience, Nehemiah's obedience, which goes throughout the entire book. And we know Nehemiah was obedient because Nehemiah wrote this in first person. Yeshaya worked through the obedience of Nehemiah. He also worked through wrongly motivated wicked people, his enemies. Nehemiah's enemies failed. They failed. And they tried their hardest to blackmail him, to kill him, to put him in fear. They tried their best, and it failed. It failed. Nehemiah 4:15 says, and it came to pass when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, everyone unto his work. So the men felt confident in doing the work. That's why they were able to do it in 52 days. Because they were confident that Yeshaya had their back. Yeshaya used the opposition of Judah's enemies to drive us to our knees. And he used Cyrus to return us to the land. He used the Persians to fund the building of the temple and also the reconstructing of Jerusalem's walls. Yeshaya put it in Nehemiah's heart. Nehemiah chapter 7, verse 5. And my God put into mine heart to gather together the nobles and the rulers and the people, that they might be reckoned by genealogy. And I found a register of the genealogy of them, which came up at the first and found therein. Another theme of Nehemiah, like in Ezra, is opposition. The enemy started rumors that the people revolted against Persia, putting up a king against Persia. They tried to intimidate the reconstruction of the walls. And in spite of the opposition, the corruption, the dissension, we completed the walls. Nehemiah 6:15 says, so the wall was finished in the 25th day of the month Elul in 52 days. We're going to go to Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. "52 days. Let's see how this came about. 50 in 2 days. Let's see how this came about. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. And it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Artaxerxes, we already discussed, he was king of Persia. He was the stepson of Esther. Now, wine before him, that tells us that he was a cupbearer. He would taste the wine before giving it to the king. So there was this huge trust between Artaxerxes and Nehemiah, because Nehemiah could falsely take sips of poison wine and give it to the king. So there was this big trust factor. But it was also a big trust factor because of the fact that Esther was his stepmother. So he showed favor to Israel. And when men were cupbearers, because of the trust factor, those cupbearers would become counselors to the king because of the trust factor that was there. Now, another thing, what he said at the end of the verse, now I had not been before time sad in his presence. That was dangerous, to be sad in the presence of the king. Especially a king like Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes wanted the best for his people. So it was dangerous. It was not recommended that you come around the king with a sad countenance. Nehemiah 2 and 2 says, wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then was I very sore afraid. He was afraid because of the fact that Artaxerxes could have had him killed. Artaxerxes says, you come to me sad? You're not sick. What's wrong? If you read Esther 4 and 2, it will confirm what I just said. It's not good to do that. The king, Artaxerxes, cared for his subjects, cared for the people around him. He knew Nehemiah wasn't sick. He knew that. He was also good to Nehemiah. So this question that he had, reasonable. He realized that Nehemiah was not sick, that the sickness was in his heart. Verse 3, and said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city and the place of my father's sepulchres lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? So Nehemiah starts with a compliment. Always compliment the king. Long live the king. Starts with a compliment. Then he goes and he tells the stuff that is bothering him about Jerusalem. Verse 4 says, then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. He says, what is your request? Artaxerxes already had known that Nehemiah's countenance, Nehemiah's sad face was due to his heart. Something was going on in his heart. And Nehemiah said that it's my homeland. It's in shambles. The gates are messed up. The sepulchres, all that needs to be fixed. Artaxerxes was kind. He did not see Nehemiah as unfaithful. Nehemiah 2:5 says, "And I said unto the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build." Now there was a decree in Ezra, the 4th chapter. Nehemiah is asking him to reverse the decree as far as rebuilding Jerusalem. He says, "May I build it?" It was a request in rebuilding the walls. This is the first time that Nehemiah ever talked to him about going to Jerusalem. He's not asking him to let him leave. He's just asking, can I be reassigned to Jerusalem? He said, "Wouldest thou send me unto Judah and to the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it?" He's not asking to be relieved of his duties. He's asking to be transferred to Jerusalem so that he can build the wall, the gates. Verse 6 says, "And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, for how long shall thy journey be? And when wilt thou return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Now, Esther was the queen of with Ahasuerus or Xerxes. The queen of the wife of Artaxerxes was Damaspia, and she was in the room. So when she was in the presence, this was a time, there was no like governing things going on. When the queen and the king sat together in the throne room in Persia, it was relaxing time. It was relaxing time. So it was a good mood already going. And that's why Artaxerxes looked at Nehemiah and said, "Why is your countenance like this? This is a good time right now." Nehemiah explained, and Nehemiah explained that it would take about 12 years, which that's how long it took for him to become governor, restore Jerusalem, become governor again, went back to Persia. Nehemiah, the 4th chapter. This book if you want to summarize the book of Nehemiah, it is a physical and spiritual reconstruction of Judah. You have the physical labor and you have the spiritual leadership. And all of it was working at the same time to rebuild Jerusalem. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 9 says, "Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God and set a watch against them day and night because of them." Verse 18, "For the builders, every one had his sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me." So the book of Nehemiah basically is a book of physical and spiritual reconstruction and rebuilding. Yeshua put willing workers to work to ensure that they would be protected. One thing one central theme about Nehemiah is you'll be surprised on how much you can accomplish if you allow Yeshua to be at your back. Everything that Nehemiah was going through, the mockery, the laughing in his face, the murder plots, the blackmail, the false prophet coming in, he still kept strong in Yeshua. And let me say this also, Nehemiah was not that old. He wasn't that old. He wasn't even born yet when Zerubbabel went to do and fix the temple. He was not born yet. Some people indicate that he was born during during the second Exodus to Jerusalem. That would make him less than 30 years old. Less than 30 years old. And look at everything that was on his shoulders. Less than 30 years old. He did not falter. He did not fall down. He did not cry. He did not murmur. He looked towards Yeshua. It's no excuse. Next week, Malachi. Tomorrow, our lesson will be deliverance from rebellion. So, with that being said, we want to thank you all for joining us on live stream. We give all the glory and praises to Ahaya Ashar Ahaya. We give thanks to Yeshua and the Holy Spirit. Join us tomorrow, live stream, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you've enjoyed the lesson, found it educational, like, share, and subscribe. The notification bell, you can press the notification bell. That will let you know when we go live. Thank you for joining us tonight. Kwam Yasharala.
Yes,